Hello, this is James Hunter, and I'm doing a follow-up video to my video earlier this past week on concepts of anxiety. The main point of that video, if you've watched it down on my timeline, is essentially understanding anxiety, breaking that down, and then having a plan of action in terms of how to use anxiety as a tool to make it work for you during challenging times. I discuss other things in that video as well. You can watch it below on the timeline. In this video, I'm doing a follow-up. I'm going to discuss cognitive dissonance just a few minutes, just to kind of, reiterate some points I made in the last video and summarize that issue. But then I'm going to move into some other issues where I'm going to talk about the cognitive aspect in terms of things that can be barriers to being more flexible in terms of you being able to focus on changing your behavior, in terms of issues where you need to work on or change things that may be unhealthy for you. So intellectually you understand this, but you seem to sometimes have issues with being able to shift in the direction of actually changing the behaviors you need to do. So I'm going to talk about that issue, and I'm going to mention some things that are commonly referred to as thinking errors. So we'll discuss that as well. So right off the bat, let's get up here. And I want to talk about two situations with making decisions. When we make decisions, there's two situations as far as the anxiety. So something is making us feel anxious. It could be your knowledge of the fact that you need to quit smoking cigarettes. I mentioned that in the last video as an example. Or perhaps you have pre-diabetes. You need to lose some weight. You've been sedentary. So you need to have a plan of action to address that. So you understand what the threat is. So there's two situations that happen with people. So we can make a decision that is based on what is true and about the source of the anxiety, essentially getting a plan of action to change behavior. So our thinking is going to become congruent with the truth, and the source of anxiety is dealt with or removed. So what does that basically mean? So a cigarette smoking, I want to make a decision based on what is true about cigarettes. So the truth about cigarettes, we know it can cause COPD. It's one of the most number one modifiable risk factors to health, meaning that you don't have to start smoking cigarettes, and if you do, you can get a plan to stop smoking cigarettes. It's modifiable. You get the idea. So understanding the truth about how much damage cigarette smoking can do to us, we're going to honor that truth, respect it, and we're not going to spin it or try to change that, if you will. I use the word honoring the truth. You heard me in the last video. The reason I use that word is because the truth is very powerful about everything. So if I'm going to make a decision about something that's an issue, I want to fully understand what is true about it. I don't want to deny it. And based on that, my plan of action is going to correspond to what the truth is in terms of changing behavior. So that's what we get at. We want to maintain what the truth is. Now, keeping my thoughts and acknowledging what the truth is about that cigarettes are bad for me, that's not necessarily going to reduce my anxiety, which is not a bad thing. That anxiety has a purpose. So because of that, my other alternative is going to be, if I want to reduce anxiety, I need to get a plan of action. I need to work on changing my behavior. So I want to try to stop smoking cigarettes. I may change my environment, throw away the ashtrays. That chair in my garage where I would sit on and smoke, and with my Diet Coke or whatever it is, those patterns, you want to mix up your environment to the extent that, it'll kind of help break that pattern. The triggers or cues, the reminders to smoking cigarettes. You may start temporarily chewing some gum instead of, smoking the cigarette. Begin exercising, drinking more water. You get the idea. So you have corresponding behaviors that follows the thinking that cigarettes is bad, which is maintaining that anxiety, which is okay. It's helping to motivate you into action. So therefore, because you have behaviors that follow your line of thinking that respects the truth, you're going to start, eventually quit smoking cigarettes. So what you have done is you've affected change. You've had a change in your behavior. You get to the point to where you no longer smoke cigarettes. You maintain cognitive thoughts or a way of thinking that smoking cigarettes, in terms of how you think about it, is bad for you. That never changed. And the anxiety that was there motivated you into action. So what happened was you are now a former cigarette smoker. You don't smoke anymore. So because you changed the behavior, now that you are a non-cigarette smoker, I don't smoke, that is congruent with the truth in terms of cigarettes are bad for you. So now I have reduced anxiety. Anxiety is no longer present. So this preferred outcome is going to reduce anxiety. So in this situation, it is the change in behavior that removed your, the threat of the cigarette smoke and what it can do to your health. If you no longer smoke cigarettes, you've now eliminated that threat. Your lungs can begin to repair and heal themselves, and the more distant it becomes, the less anxiety. Definitely quitting smoking if you know it's harmful to you, and if it was causing anxiety because you acknowledge the truth about it. Stopping smoking is going to alleviate the anxiety because, okay, I did the right thing, right? The right thing for my health. As a former cigarette smoker myself, I quit a long time ago in my 30s. I'm about 49 years old now, so I feel I don't have any anxiety about it, other than if reminders that, why I don't want to go back to that habit, because I know it's not good for me. In fact, the truth about cigarettes obviously remains. I'm using it as an example and how I think about it. What changed was my behavior. So I have no anxiety over cigarette smoking as it relates to me, because I no longer have that issue. I changed my behavior. So that is the preferred method of what ideally, hopefully will happen. If you're in this pandemic right now, you may have been someone with prediabetes type 2, or you already have diabetes type 2, you may be been a bit overweight, you may be a cigarette smoker. And because before all this happened, you may not have had that sense of urgency to do something about those situations that I mentioned in the last video. However, now because there's a greater sense of urgency with anxiety with COVID-19, this virus, we know that if you are obese, have diabetes type 2, if you're a cigarette smoker, now there's more a sense of immediacy and it being an imminent threat if you get infected with COVID-19, because it can be a gateway to death. We're seeing individuals with those risk factors who die and succumb to this virus. So now we have more of an imminent threat upon us, which I mentioned in the last video. So that sense of urgency has got a lot of people to reconsider their way of thinking about cigarettes. They're not distorting the truth anymore, which I'm about to get into. So therefore, they're in that plan of action mode. So that's a good thing. You can call it a blessing in disguise, but people realize, hey, it's not like before the pandemic that if you're a cigarette smoker, it may be causing harm over time, so it's not as immediate, and you can be comfortable and rationalize things away. Same thing if you're overweight or you're borderline diabetes. The threat wasn't necessarily as imminent or upon you. It's maybe more distant down the road in the future, and people can maybe manage and distort the truth about that a bit easier because it's not suddenly upon you. And that can be human nature in terms of how we perceive threats. So here's what's happening a lot of times, is that we have with the first situation, making decisions based on what is the truth about the source of anxiety. So over here, here's the unhealthy or maladaptive or not the best productive way. You get the idea. So making decisions based on distorting the truth equals no plan of action, no change of behavior. The thinking about the source of anxiety is incongruent with the truth. And the source of anxiety or threat is not removed. So basically, what does that mean? Let's use cigarette smoking again. So I know what the facts are, the experts, the doctors, Surgeon General, right? Cigarette smoking can lead to lung cancer, COPD, arteriosclerosis. You get the idea. There's a whole slew of harmful things cigarettes does. So this is undeniable facts. So instead of keeping my thinking to honor the truth and then getting a plan of action like over here, here's what the distorter will do, or the person who wants to remain in denial, is that they understand it's bad for them, but they're going to look for an exception. They'll mention, oh, my Uncle Willie, heck, he lived to be 80 and he smoked cigarettes, right? Never mind other variables that may be in play as far as people's longevity. And who's to say Willie wouldn't have lived to be 95, right? And then there's also quality of life issues and so on and so on. So the exception does not change the overall truth and the rule to everybody else. Cigarette smoking is always harmful. So anyways, the person will use an exception, like I heard a comedian say one time, or I'll just buy the pack of cigarettes where the Surgeon General says may be harmful if you're pregnant, right? Well, if you're a guy, well, that doesn't apply to me. I'm not pregnant. I'll just buy that pack, right? So rationalize, and you get the idea. Or flat out just say, I don't believe the experts, right? So you are distorting or changing what is true about the source of anxiety, which is cigarette smoking. So when I light the cigarette, and I know people, maybe I don't want people to think of me as a cigarette smoker, there's that issue too. I know people quit because they get anxiety about how they're being viewed. And so anyways, but the anxiety that may be coming from, it's harmful to your health, I feel less anxious now. So in this situation, I'm also reducing anxiety, but I'm doing it by distorting the truth about cigarette smoking and its harmful effects. So by distorting the truth about it, I feel less anxious because I've come up with these excuses to where that doesn't apply to me. There's something to be said about uniqueness. You think you're unique. It's a thinking error. And I mentioned gravity in my last video. Gravity does not care who you are. You step off a cliff, you're going to fall, right? It doesn't care who you are. So same thing with the truth about other type of situations. Cigarettes doesn't care how well educated you are. It doesn't care what race, culture, religion, how much money, how smart, how popular. Doesn't care. It's going to do its thing, right? So therefore, the person feels less anxious because they distorted the truth about the cigarette smoking. So their decision was based on these distortions. It reduces the anxiety. The problem is it does not remove the threat. It's incongruent. The behavior is still incongruent with the truth, and it maintains that unhealthy behavior of smoking cigarettes. So this situation, there's no change in behavior. The person continues to smoke cigarettes because they feel less anxious based on their distorted thinking. So that's the problem up here, is that the source of anxiety or threat is not removed. That's a problem. Cigarettes is it still can kill you prematurely over time, or in this case, with COVID-19 virus, if you're a regular cigarette smoker and it can affect your respiratory as far as your lungs and so on. We know that. That's no bueno. It's not good. So now the threat's even more imminent. Whereas you may have thought, I got time. I'll quit smoking cigarettes before I turn 50 or when I get older. Well, you know what? That may not be so good anymore with what we're dealing with right now in this pandemic. So the thinking is incongruent with the truth. You get the idea. The source of anxiety is not removed with this method up here. It's still there. You still can be harmed with it. And even more so now with the pandemic and COVID-19 virus, all these risk factors that I've discussed with people and try to share information. Before all this, the sense of urgency may not have been there. So hopefully there's more of a sense of urgency now because there's more at stake now. So perhaps people will be more motivated into action. So I would encourage people to be mindful what I'm going to talk about here in a bit, mindful of their thoughts, evaluate, look for evidence of your thinking. Is there any evidence that supports that? And be honest with it. Be honest with yourself. And then we want to get a plan of action. We want to have a structure, look at our options, and we want to practice implementing behavior, putting change of behavior in place over time. Nothing happens in one day, but you can certainly focus on steps day by day. And I understand that quitting smoking cigarettes is a process. It was a process when I quit, but when I was done, and that's a whole other video. So I'm going to go ahead and move the video forward and start talking about what's called demand characteristics, absolute thinking and rigid thinking versus a flexible way of how you view yourself in relationship to your behaviors, and a bit about thinking errors. I'm going to mention that and how these issues, if you don't evaluate yourself, can be a barrier unbeknownst to you to changing your behaviors in the right direction to take better care of yourself and to move yourself in a direction to have a better quality of life and be safe. So I want to talk about what's called or referred to as demand characteristics. What does that mean and why is it important? So about 23 years ago, maybe more than 23 years ago, in graduate school, I was working on my master's degree, we had a visiting professor that was basically people were invited to come to listen to him present and speak. This particular individual within his presentation was talking about ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And it was during this time that I heard the term demand characteristics, which intuitively a lot of us kind of think about this in terms of what I'm going to get into. However, somebody actually gave it a term. So one of the other students that was there pretty much had a back and forth with the professor, not necessarily calling them out on whether to the extent of the validity what he was presenting, but it's kind of being devil's advocate and asking some questions about it, about ADHD. And essentially the crux of the issue was, to what extent or how much of the behaviors of children with ADHD is either a function or result of the actual condition, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which does exist, and how much of it is a function or result of these children having a label over them that says, hey, I have ADHD, and being intelligent and smart enough to understand that this label in a way can actually be a rationalization or a justification for a continuation of behavior that's not appropriate, talking out of turn, not staying in their seat, goofing off in class, and then the teacher asks little Johnny, when you have the seat, or even adolescents too. I taught a little bit myself and seen some of this, and they'll say, well, I have ADHD, right? They're just throwing the label, that diagnosis out as a basically to excuse or give permission to that behavior. The problem with this is that the emphasis or the focus becomes on that label, if you will, that's has descriptive characteristics to it about the person's behaviors or the diagnosis, if you will. So the focus can be a lot on that and not as much on the actual behavior itself and what can be done to be accountable for the behavior, to work on modifying and treating that better, or to address it more. It can be a bit of a distraction, whether it is intentional in some cases with individuals, and I'm going to get into this, they know what they're doing, or sometimes it may become default because they've been conditioned that these behaviors essentially are the expectation that this label demands of it, right? And then it perpetuates. So there's a lot that can be said about that. And just real quick, I do know people who have ADHD. It does exist. Essentially, people can have a higher stimulation threshold, so they require more stimulation to feel optimized, and then they can focus better. That's why the idea of the stimulant, when they take it, for them, it helps them to level out and feel okay. And there's something to be said about people who may have other issues going on that manifest behaviors that look like ADHD, like depression. Maybe they're just irritable or so on and so on. And perhaps maybe they don't have it, but they're being labeled as that. And that's a whole other discussion. I actually went to a training on that from a doctor who spoke to those issues, and this was years ago. So let's move it forward into where am I going with this. So all these years later, these demand characteristics, it doesn't necessarily have to be an official diagnosis like the one I gave. It can be people who assign labels to themselves. And one of the most popular ones I hear when I'm working with individuals to help encourage and promote a change in behavior, especially with nutrition, how to eat healthier to achieve the outcome they're working on, is I'll be presenting information, giving them the tools and the information that if you adhere to this, you're going to get where you need to be. Speaking about solutions too, when they come up with their yeah, but ifs in terms of being able to incorporate some of the behaviors. They will do here it comes, I am a stress eater, okay? Now this is not to be antagonistic or to any particular person. A lot of people use this. I might be a stress eater. I might be a stress smoker. I talked about smoking cigarettes. Interestingly enough, during these trying times, there's people that are going in both directions. Some started smoking again, some are trying to stop. But anyways, so with the stress eater, let's stick with that one. So I am a stress eater becomes either it can be a rebuttal in terms of the person basically saying, well, I'm not going to do that, or change the behavior, if you will. So we talk about being at a restaurant. I hear that a lot. Well, I have to go out and eat for work. That's fine. There's always the lesser of all the evils at pretty much any restaurant. You don't have to have the worst thing there. You can get chicken soup, right? Low in calories, dense in nutrients. You get the idea. So there's always solutions within the context of a lot of things. I'm going to talk about our thinking here in a bit and how we give ourselves permission statements to enable things. So the stress eating label, if someone's trying to give me information, hey James, here's some things you can do. Oh, and you have 2 jobs, okay. Well, here's maybe some food prep ideas you can do on your day off. Well, and they're presenting me solution after solution after solution and options, but I keep going, yeah, but, and exceptions, and then, well, I'm a stress eater. What I really can be communicating, there's content of what is said, but then there's the process. Why is it being said, right? So what I could be communicating is what I'm really saying is I'm not ready to change yet. I'm still anchored to a way of thinking in a particular relationship with food and what it does for me and in terms of those ingrained patterns of thinking about it and the relationship with food. So which goes into another point. Education in and of itself is not enough. It never has been enough. We always hear, well, we need to get more people education about how to eat for diabetes type 2, educations for drugs and alcohol, how they're bad for them. We need to educate people about, any number of issues. And the problem many of the times when I meet people, it's not a lack of education. It's not a lack of the ability to intellectually make an assessment up here, right? Is this a threat or is it not? It's not the problem. Rather, what we're dealing with is a way of thinking, a way of coping, and an ability to start changing your behavior. And that's not going to occur until we change the way we perceive ourselves in relationship to people, places, things, situations. I'm using food right now as an example. So what happens is these labels, I am a stress eater, can become a rationalization to justify and continue the behavior, whether you're doing it on purpose, subconsciously, and you will have an understanding because you're still tied, anchored, or tethered to a way of living, or you're doing it unbeknownst to yourself, just not knowing any better. Either of those situations are possible. So this can be with the stress eater. You get the idea. So people and how we speak about ourselves, I want to give an example because I think maybe it'll help highlight something I want to make a point about. So when I worked for the state of Texas many moons ago, we would go to various trainings, and they have what's called people first language, right? So what happened is that people would say, Johnny, the person with that has a cocaine addiction, or Johnny, diabetes type 2 Johnny, right? Or Johnny cerebral palsy Johnny, or Johnny wheelchair Johnny. I mean, people would say stuff like that, that the label is who they are, essentially, right? So people would, or like blindness, Johnny's blind, right? Very powerful if you think about it. You are encapsulating everything about a human being into a word, a label, a descriptive describer, which can prime and program not just that individual, how they view themselves, but how other people view that person. So people first language, this is nothing new to those of us who work in the counseling field or the helping profession, is that you're a human being first, right? So Johnny is a human being first. He may be a father, somebody's brother. Heck, he may be a mechanic. He can be, there's a lot of things about Johnny, but he's a human being who happens to have diabetes type 2, which is a particular issue with him, a characteristic. Or Johnny is a human being of all these other things who happens to have maybe mild cerebral palsy, or who happens to have any number of issues going on. Let's say it's not a physical or mental issue. Let's say he has a behavioral issue that's a manifestation that's just of things go on in life. So Johnny is not the obsessive compulsive Johnny. No, it's Johnny. He's all kinds of things. He happens to have this issue where he gets a bit obsessed sometimes, right? So that's the idea, is that you look at people for the totality of who they are, their strengths, their potentials, everything that comprises who they are as a human being. So therefore, if you agree with that people are more than just if they have an issue, and that it is more respectful and more dignifying to use people first language when we address our fellow human beings, then why should it not be any different for yourself, right? Sometimes we need to give ourselves and elevate ourselves in terms of respect for ourselves. So why would I want to call myself a stress eater? That's who I am? No, you're much more than that. Focus on everything of who you are, your strengths, the things that have value and meaning, your family, maybe you're motivated at your job, your goals, your dreams. All these things encapsulate who you are and can be powerful. A healthier way, which now I'm going to move into then what, is that these type of demand characteristics can be traps. So we want to have a flexible way of how we talk about ourselves. I could, instead of saying I am a stress eater, let's say again, there's a person trying to help me change my way of eating, and I keep coming up with the yeah, but, and if, if I'm at it was my cousin's birthday, I had to eat the birthday cake. I'm going to get into that. Absolute thinking, rigid, no flexibility. The truth, There's a lot of ways you can honor your cousin's birthday or being there. You don't have to eat the cake if you just began a diet, right? Sabotaging. So what we can do when we talk about if we have an issue with the stress, if you eat the label, I'm a stress eater, a healthier, more flexible way, in my opinion, would be to say this, or to speak about it. Say, you know what? I appreciate. I know you're trying to show me these options to eat healthier, and I look at these ideas, and I think I'm gonna try to work on that. But to be honest with you, when I get home from work, if it's a long day, I have a tendency that when I feel a lot of stress, I eat these particular foods because it makes me feel better. Later on, I may feel bad about it, but that's what I've been doing. I tend to eat unhealthy and too much when I experience stress. Or I may smoke cigarettes sometimes when I have a lot of anxiety or stress. And I'm just, want to put that out there, right? There's nothing wrong with that. That is very productive, because now the focus is not on a label that demands or has the expectations, and without you knowing it may even be rationalizing or justifying the continuation of the unhealthy behavior. What you have now is a conversation about the behavior, so therefore you can work together with whoever's trying to help you. Maybe it's a personal trainer, a life coach. Maybe it's one of your friends who knows a lot about exercise and nutrition, right? So now you're in a position that is flexible and not closed off or rigid with limited possibilities in terms of how you can move forward, right? So therefore, you are not trying to pivot or dodge like in football, right? You're taking it on, which is another point in my last video in terms of the source of anxiety, fear, or stress, is that we can either confront it, do something about it, or we're going to try to get away from it, right? In this case, if you don't if you don't label yourself and kind of play too much into these demand characteristics, and there's something to be said about something that describes behavior, but don't fall too much into that to where it now becomes more of a stumbling block, if you will. It can be. So you get the idea with demand characteristics. So now I'm going to talk about absolute type thinking and permission statements, and a bit about distortions, okay, or thinking errors, if you will, somewhat. So with absolute thinking, it's something that I've kind of, as working as a licensed professional counselor, licensed chemical dependency counselor, but also as a personal trainer, you're dealing with issues of changing behavior too. It's not just, hey, let me show you how to supervise an exercise program with you and try to teach you some things. The individuals, that part of that formula is the nutrition aspects, and that, as the saying goes, you cannot outrun a bad diet if you're eating horrible or too much, or just counterproductive type eating towards what your goals you want it to be. So these types of things are issues in terms of changing the behavior. Like I said before, it's not just merely here's the education and the nutrition plan. Here's what you do. Awesome. I'll see you your next session, and then we don't talk about it again. No, it's usually checking in with people. How you doing? And where usually it's a discussion about behavior is what it boils down to. It was my cousin's birthday, right? The example. So I had to have the cake. Or I can't go to a rock concert and not drink some beers, right? Permission statements, absolute thinking. The truth is, of course, you can go to a rock concert. You don't have to drink the beer. That's just basically you want to drink the beer. Be honest about it, right? So, okay. So let's get over here to the absolute thinking. So what do I mean when I'm talking about absolute type statements or thinking? I must, I have to, I couldn't, I should, right? So these words that people use are little that come before the excuse, the rationalization, are essentially communications that are rigid and black and white, right? It was a Christmas party of the employees. I can't not have a piece of cake, right? You've already narrowed the possibilities and so on. So everywhere that I've ever worked, there's always a birthday party. There's always the holidays, there's always the potlucks, everybody brings food, right? And there's something to be said about having some flexibility. If you're on top of your game, you're already, figuratively speaking, like in a football game, the fourth quarter, and you're winning by 8 touchdowns, right? Let's say you got everything under control. As far as your health and your fitness, you manage your nutrition consistently now. As you've lost the weight you needed to, or you've eliminated a lot of these other behaviors and you got it under control. So therefore, can you occasionally have some of these things that you haven't had in a while. You can, if you're at that level and you've got the discipline in place and then you're back on track, there's something to be said for that. But if you haven't changed your thinking yet, you're still ambiguous about changing behavior, and you still haven't, even it's just the first quarter using the football game, and you're still, it's the first down, you haven't even, had maybe a couple plays yet, you still got a whole process ahead of you. So it'd behoove you to be a bit more, disciplined in how you're going to make these decisions. So it's okay to politely tell people no. You don't owe them an explanation technically. It's your health, it's your life. So there's ways to redirect that. There's another video I can do about having boundaries in the workplace in terms of these issues, okay? And being able to have tact and do it respectfully, and how you get through that. Food has a lot of meanings to it other than just eating. It ties into social dynamics. For some cultures, food can be love, right? So when you ask somebody to change their eating habits, to them, their process might be, oh, so you want me to not love my family as much. No, it's rather just changing a way of eating. You do what you need for you, and then if they're going to eat these other things, that's better than nothing. Changes can happen as a process over time. You're not going to change the whole system at once, but you can learn to have flexibility and that balance. So understanding that being able to change the way you eat, for instance, it doesn't have to be about that. You can explain, hey, I'm just trying to do this for my health, but you know what, we're going to still be a family, we still eat together and so on. That's a whole other video I should do just on that, how for some people food is love, right? So our interpretation, our thinking, how we think about food is important, but also these absolute statements that are just specific to those. And the rigid thinking, really what that's about is this readiness to change. We're still tied into those patterns, we're not ready, or we may have some anxiety about letting go because of the things that particular way of living and eating is what it's doing for us. That makes I feel good, after a stressful day, if I can come home and eat ice cream or smoke a cigarette or whatever. So we have to replace those behaviors, by the way, to increase the likelihood you're not going to go back to them. So learning a new way of eating, finding the balance that's going to work for you, and then replacing your ways of managing stress or reducing anxiety with healthy alternatives, which will be a separate video that I'm going to speak about in the third one I do. So we got to have that plan of action like I talk about. So a flexible way of thinking, again, like the other example I used, is that, you know what, when I go to birthday parties, instead of saying yeah, but, or I must, I have to, eliminate those words from your vocabulary if you're working on changing behavior. And start your transition into discussing them is saying, you could say, well, or this is what happens, something that's kind of open-ended. It's not like, all or nothing or black or white. So you can then just talk about the situation. This is something I have an issue with my family, or when I'm at work, when we go out to eat. I just got to be honest, I struggle in these areas. I haven't been able to make the better decision, and just talk about that, discuss it, and be open-minded enough to consider the options and possibilities. Everyone's situation is different, so therefore you're going to find the balance that's possible for you within your situation, and doing something is better than nothing. And just over time, small changes over time add up to big changes, can be powerful and can be life-changing. So let's say you're going to just focus on sugar for the first month, right? And breads and things like that. Keep it simple. And if a person, let's say conservatively speaking, you lost 3 or 4 pounds a month, do the math. What's that going to add up to in 12 months? But what if it's 5 pounds a month? Do the math on that too. So it adds up over time. So in 6 months time, it's 30, 40 pounds, right? In 8 months time, 9 months time, it can be 50 pounds. And you look back like, wow, all these small changes I did over time, they added up, and here I am now. I've lost 40, 50, 60 pounds, whatever that number is. So trust a process, focus on the process, instead of getting caught up in individual specific moments that maybe bring you anxiety because you feel threatened by it, because you're not sure about an ability to deal with that or change it because of your way of thinking about it. So concentrate on the overall process. Take responsibility for honoring the truth that I mentioned. The truth is, there is no such thing as I have to, I must, I should, and I could have, or could have is another one, but could have is more about denying responsibility a little bit. But the ones that are more rigid, that I have to, must, and I couldn't. That's what I was getting at, the couldn't word. So those words, removing them from the vocabulary, examine the truth about them is, if I'm at a concert and it's my favorite band, the truth is you can go to it. There is no requirement or a demand that you have to do any particular behavior while you're there, other than listen and be present. You can have a different beverage, or you don't have to smoke, and so on. You get the idea. Same thing with social functions and gatherings. You don't have to. There is no have to anything while you're there as regards to the foods that are there. You define who you are, and you decide you validate yourself, and you be your own sense of worth. Okay, a lot of people get the peer pressure. That's the thing that we got to work on, and how we manage that, to where we don't gravitate towards those behaviors, right, that are going to be counterproductive towards our goal. So let's move forward to, I mentioned flexible thinking. So a couple of thinking errors, we magnify things, or I guess catastrophize things. We can do that in terms of reducing anxiety, to not catastrophize things. And this is going to move in a different direction as far as checking our thinking again, being mindful, evidence and evaluate for what it is our thought process is, and then what are our options, and then practice other behaviors, right? So with the economy right now, the shutdown, and everything that's going on, the uncertainty, I've heard people say, and they have it's the worst case possible scenario, is that the economy will never recover and things will never get better again in terms of the economy. People being able to go back to work in certain industries. So that is an extreme way of thinking. We're only, half a year, a little more than half a year into this. So the truth is, how much evidence is there for that, that supports that way of thinking? Examine that. Sure, there's temporarily some things that are going on. As far as we know, next year the economy could recover and come back stronger than ever before. And in some ways, this may actually be creating opportunities for people that may have not been there otherwise, had not some of this happened. And I kind of mentioned a little bit about that in the other video. So perhaps getting a bit more of an objective, flexible view on the present situation, and not catastrophizing it too much. You can avoid having a disproportionate amount of anxiety commensurate to or related to the what it is you're feeling anxiety about, the economy. So that doesn't mean you won't still have some concern. We all have concerns, right? But at least that anxiety will be more proportional or on level with what's going on. And then you can work on coping with that, managing that, right? Structure and activities, like I talked about in my last video, things that can help reduce anxiety. If you're looking for a job, if you're plugging into resources, having a sense of purpose and meaning, getting out there and doing things, even though you may not be working right now. Maybe it's been 4 or 5 months since a lot of us out there have worked. Thankfully for me, I was able to kind of adapt and adjust to the situation because of the anxiety. It motivated me into action, to get a plan of action to address what was going on. And so here I am. I could have went the other route and had an all or none thinking and said, well, if I can't do exactly how my employment was before all this, then I'm done, right? So I didn't want to get caught up in that way of thinking. I started, evaluating, assessing what's happening, what are my options, and what can I do. I know some people who went into a different line of work temporarily altogether, because their industry was shut down. A lot of people went working for the grocery stores, right, because they were so busy during the earlier part of the year. And I guess somewhat they're remaining still busy. So they were hiring a lot of people. So some people are like, you know what, I can't go to my particular job right now, but I can go work 40 hours a week, right, at a grocery store. And so they had a plan of action and a solution. Now that may not be exact for everybody, but you get the idea, those types of things. So not trying to amplify or make things more than what they are. Consider options, right? There's technically thinking outside that box. What are your options? The truth is, we're not in a situation where there's 0 options. They may be limited. Some areas are restricted right now in terms of how much how the economy is opening up in phases. but there's not zero options. There's still options left, and it may not be easy. I'm not saying it's easy. So just try to be optimistic, be hopeful for the future, and be doing things that may help you feel less anxious. Like I said, get plugged in, be doing things, be looking for solutions, reach out for help where it's possible. You know, people who can support you as far as they're on your team, right? They want you to do well, and so on. So there's more that can be said about that, but let's go ahead and let me come down here to you know, what we spoke about, the lifestyle change for quitting the unhealthy behaviors, to start doing a bit of a review and a summary. Where I started at up here, decisions based on the truth versus making decisions that are decisions based on distorting the facts, the truth about that source of anxiety. Education alone is not going to get most of us there. Some people are just that motivated. You provide them the education and they're on top of it and they execute very well a plan of action. A lot of people are going to need more than just education, though. They're going to have to work on a changing the way of thinking, okay? Focus about the labels again. Be careful to where the focus of if you're trying to problem solve something, you don't want your focus to be on a label so much, more so than the actual behavior itself. Have a discussion about the behavior and how you can change that, right? So these things, I think you get the idea. Acting upon things we have a sense of control over. So things that we have control over within our available options, you'll focus on those things as much as you're able to, and try not to be, you know, the things that we don't have control over. You know, that sometimes can be a bit unproductive. It doesn't mean that we're not mindful of it and that we evaluate our way of thinking about it in terms of how we can cope with it, and then be focusing on the things that I mentioned having control over. That's going to help us feel less anxious. So I want to finish this video with one more type of thinking error. There's a bunch. Tunnel vision is one that I see happening. It happens in a lot of scenarios. So what is tunnel vision, right? So tunnel vision is essentially when we get like a tunnel, right? Like focused in or fine-tuned in on just things that are going wrong. Things that are going wrong, and we're not expanding our peripheral, if you will, to look at that larger picture of everything else that's going on. So be mindful of that. You know, sure, there's things that we're focused in on right now to do something about, the plan of action I talked about, to reduce anxiety, but expand your context of your thinking for things that we can still be grateful for, right? So if you are still relatively in good health, that's a lot to be thankful for. Your health is the first wealth, as it's said. You know, that is a foundation from which everything comes from. You know, if you don't have your health, how are you gonna, you know, be good at your job? How are you gonna achieve your goals and your dreams, right? So our reasonable service is try to, you know, maintain a, you know, relatively good sense of health, or get a good state of health to the extent that's possible within our situations, doing the best with what we have to work with. So tunnel vision, I'm just focused on all the problems, everything that's going on. So I'm going to take a deep breath and expand my peripheral. I'm going to look, you know, there's a lot more out there. Your relationships, if you still have good relationships, you know, people you care about, or they're, you know, you're still in contact with them, right? A lot of things we can still have gratitude for, and look at some things that may be going right. You know, find something that's going good. Acknowledge those. And feel good about it, right? So even in the midst of you know, when he's in the midst of a storm, you know, people talk about challenging times. You have to kind of remind yourself that temporary storms do not last forever, and sometimes they clear a path, right? To where now, you know, things that were not a focus before become a focus, and then you accomplish things either more timely, because, you know, that sense of urgency and so on. So try not to have too much tunnel vision. Yes, we need to hone in on problems and troubleshoot and do things about stuff, but we don't want to have such a tunnel vision that's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that we're forgetting about the other things we can still be grateful for, right? Because they're there, and yes, it's a challenging time, but we need to remind ourselves of those things too, and that way that's good for our health. So I hope these videos are helpful. As I mentioned in my last video, there's so much. There's a lot of things that can be said about in terms of concepts of anxiety. There's more than one way to look at it in terms of whatever template or whatever model you want to use that helps you to reduce anxiety and then affect change of behavior that's positive, more power to you. 5 plus 5 equals 10, but so does 6 plus 4. It equals 10 too. So yeah, there's different ways for different days. And maybe I haven't mentioned something yet that you might be thinking of, and that's okay too. Maybe you want to drop it in a comment. That'd be fantastic. So everybody take care. Have a good weekend. Until I make a third video on some of those other things I mentioned, I may make a video about. Hope these are helpful, and take care. Thank you.